Thanks, guys, for sticking around for this tonight. So we're just gonna have like a little conversation. We'll leave some time at the end for you guys to ask some questions. But first off, Chelsea, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Is this the first time you've been back to Sacred Heart in a while?
This is actually the first time I've ever been in this building.
Really? Okay.
And fun fact, I don't know if anyone knows this in here. I did my grad degree here online.
Okay.
It's actually
okay.
the Strategic Communications Public Relations grad degree that I got.
Okay.
But I'm very glad to be here.
We're
so thank you for
happy to
having
have
me.
you. So I would just love if you could walk me through, doesn't have to be super in-depth, but like your brief, like walk me through your resume, kind of after you left or did your online grad program here. Where did you go? What did you do?
Yeah, okay. I moved around a lot, and it happened very quickly. I will try to keep it as brief as possible. I graduated from undergrad at Albertus Magnus College up in New Haven in 2016. After that, I went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting in Stratford. It's like an 8-week course, and through that, I got all of my hands-on experience that I needed. I got my first job in the industry in 2017. It was about 6 months after I finished up at the broadcasting school, and it was an operations technician job. So behind the scenes, I knew I wanted to be on air, but that's just not how it works sometimes. And so I did that for a total of two years, about two and a half years. During that time, I was a production assistant at NBC Sports as well. I did that for a year. I got my first on-air gig as a sports anchor in MMJ in 2019. And that was up in Utica, New York. It was market 169, a very small market. I did that for a year and a half. I went to NESN, New England Sports Network in Boston. I heard you talking a lot about the Red Sox, and I was like, okay, I know Will Middlebrooks. I was there for a year and a half as well. And then I started at SNY in December of 2022. So I'm about at that year and a half mark. That's been my timeline, but that's my resume.
So being on air is very different than a lot of the jobs, a lot of the stuff that people have been talking about today. And it takes a resilient person to do it because, like you said, you graduate from college, and I'm sure you had opportunities at your university to do interviews, to do sideline, maybe some color, play-by-play, kind of whatever you could get your hands on. What kept you going during those first kind of 3 years where you were not on air? How were you keeping your skills up for people that when they graduate, they might not have the opportunity to go right on air?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think that the Connecticut School of Broadcasting really helped because in my undergrad, we didn't have any of that. I had zero experience. The professor that introduced me to the industry randomly asked me to do Student Athlete of the Month interviews just so we could have some content on our website. And that was my senior year, so I had no experience. So CSB really helped me with that. And then I think honestly, because I went to such a small school and no one that I know of from Albertus went into this industry, especially to be on air, it was almost like you have nothing to lose and this is something that you really want. So everything that happened after that was just like oh wow, oh great. I do think that, I come from a very faith-based family. So the things that we want, we bring those things to God and then we work hard for them. I also am a former athlete, so it's just like, you just do it. And sometimes some people can think of it as you just being delusional, which we probably are, but you just go out and you do it. And I think mentors really helped me. And seeing people like me doing those things, I think really pushed me and motivated me even more to do it.
So you spoke about your family a little bit. Your family is supremely talented. You have a ton of people in your family that are great at a variety of different things. We were talking a little bit earlier, one of your sisters is a lawyer.
Yeah.
You have a musician sister, brother played basketball, right? What was that household like growing up in when you were a kid?
Oh gosh, loud. Loud and nuts. My parents are here, so they could probably attest to that. It was great. I think the best part about my relationship with my siblings is that it's almost like, and this is my experience, I don't know if they agree, But it's almost like an iron sharpens iron thing. Like, we're all very competitive. We get that from our parents, definitely my dad. But it's like we just want to be good at what we do. And with anything, my parents always told us, it's like you put your best foot forward and you do it with excellence. And so anything that we did growing up, as much as we could, we would do it that way. And so I think we kind of feed off each other. Again, it's that competitive spirit, like, oh, okay, I see you. I'm gonna try to do this or whatever. But my parents definitely, like, they got us into sports very young. I started playing soccer probably at 5 or 6 years old. And through that, I just kind of stuck with it. And that's how we all were growing up playing sports, and it kind of just like kept developing and evolving from there. And then our competitive spirit, which I think is so great in athletes, that is so easily transferable into your professional life, regardless of what that is, if that's staying in sports. If you're a teacher, if you are a mailman or bus driver, you just want to be the best at what you're doing.
Talk to me a little bit about what kind of support system you have. You've talked about how amazing it is, but how important is that in an industry like this that can be brutal? You have to miss holidays, you work late, sometimes you don't get to see your family as much as you would like. Yeah. How important is that support system? Oh my gosh, it's everything. If you ask anyone in the industry, or the majority of people in the industry, they will tell you that they've had a moment where they thought, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. This is rough. And it was a lot of missing holidays, or let's celebrate Thanksgiving on Monday because I have to work Thursday all day. And when I was working in Utica, which is about 4 hours from here, and I don't know if you all know, but a lot of people who get on air and want to start on air, they usually go to smaller markets to get their start. A lot of my friends, former colleagues, have moved across the country to the middle of Arkansas. I'm sorry if any of you are from Arkansas. It's a beautiful place, I'm sure. I was blessed enough to be able to just go 4 hours away from home, where I was able to drive back if I needed to. And so when COVID hit, I was like, man, I gotta see my family. And we were all so close. So almost every other week I was driving down because I just needed that in-person connection, because I didn't have friends up there. I didn't have any family there. And so that really helped me continue what I'm doing. The encouragement that my family gives me on a daily basis really helped me get through those tough, very tough times. And during COVID as well, that's actually when I started my grad program here. It was all online, which I loved. And that also kind of gave me a fire to put some of my energy towards something that's positive and something that I'm interested in. And the support from my family was great in that process as well. So you've talked about your family, and when I asked you a question before, you mentioned mentors. Speak to me a little bit about your mentors and how important they are in this industry. Oh, mentors are so important. Mentorship it's everything. I would not be doing the job that I'm doing today without mentorship, which is why as I continue to move up in my career, move forward, I want to be a mentor to someone one day. My first mentor, his name is Justin Walters, and every time I talk about my career journey, I talk about him. Because when I was the operations technician, my first job in Rybrook, New York for a local station, he was the sports director. And I remember when I first started there, I was like, I need to find who the sports anchor, whoever is, and tell them that I want to do this and see how I can shadow, do whatever to become them pretty much. And he was so willing for me to just learn from him. He helped me put my first reel together. Mind you, this is post-undergrad. So I'm like really green, like raw, like there's no experience, no nothing. And he would bring me into the studio on off hours. We talked about the hours that we work, which are so crazy. I went from working from 2 to 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. to noon to, whatever other hours there were, but I was coming in on off days, off hours to do that with him. And he really was intentional and really helping me get to the point of receiving my first job offer. And I'm so grateful for him for that, because he didn't have to do that. But I do think that people in the industry also realize that we have all been in that space. So, yeah. Yeah, so what advice do you have for young students who are about to graduate and are about to start these entry-level jobs? How do they find a mentor? I would say do some research.
find someone in the industry that is doing the job that you want to do. And again, you can pivot and switch jobs and departments and things like that. But if you find one person, go on Instagram, Twitter, any social media, send them a DM. And I always tell people to like slide in my DMs and just ask to just like learn from them. Just, you know, can I pick your brain? Can we get on a Zoom call? Like I do those all the time. And it's so nerve-wracking to do it. It's so funny too because I hate networking. I really don't like it because I can be very awkward sometimes, but it is very important, and you will be very surprised how many people are so willing to give you just an ounce of their time. And granted, our schedules are incredibly busy, but people will make it a point to help you.
So we've talked a lot, obviously today is the Women in Sports Symposium, and it's not an elephant in the room because it's the truth. It was a supremely male-dominated industry. A lot of amazing females are breaking in, and a lot of amazing females are leading the way in on-air work. We have a lot of people to look up to. What has your experience been like working with, I'm assuming a lot of the crews are male-dominated?
Yeah, oh, for sure. Every person that I worked with up until I got to Nesson was a male. All of the mentors or managers or whoever, they were all men. One thing that really stuck with me was one of my professors in college. She was actually the interim SID at the time. Her name was Kristen DeCarly. And she was the one who asked me about doing the Student Athlete of the Month interviews. But she was the only woman in the department at that time. And I thought it was so cool because you have to deal with so much at times. And there's microaggressions, and there's, the ladies were saying, do you actually know what you're talking about or whatever? And so I thought it was really cool that she was able to handle that on her own. And when I was getting into the industry, there were Carrie Champion, Sage Steele, and then there were Lisa Salters, maybe a few other women that I knew of or looked up to. And so as my career progressed, I always made it a point to, if there is a woman in a room or a Black woman in a room, I want to go introduce myself, because there are things that they have had to deal with or go through that I don't have to, or don't have to deal with as much. But I think that it's so important to find that sort of group of women, lift each other up. And yeah, I just think that it's huge for me, because even with my dad, my dad coached me in soccer in my years growing up. So I always had that male affirmation, and allyship is so important. I'm not saying that men suck, but the allyship piece is so important because there are a lot of men in these positions. And so for them to also bring up women and place women in positions of leadership on air, to have that confirmation and validation is so important. But I think that, having more women now, just like you, being in the industry, is just really inspiring to me.
Well, you're inspiring to all of us, so we're glad that we are able to have these kind of events to make these connections, because we've talked about this a ton. It's a small industry.
Very small.
We know 6 people that each other know.
I know, and we just met today. I'm
exactly.
Okay.
There's you say there's 6 degrees of separation in sports, there's 1.5.
Literally, yeah.
Everybody has worked with everybody. So speaking on that, what's some advice you can give to people that are going into those entry-level jobs? And I know you always say, be nice to everybody. You never know who your boss is gonna be. But I think that's really true when it comes to sports. It's one of those things where news travels fast, and kind of always be on your best behavior, always be working hard. What advice do you have for students that are about to go into that stage of their life?
Yeah, I would say just that. I would say, especially going into this industry, do not come into the industry with an entitled mindset. You are owed absolutely nothing, and that's in every industry. But I think especially with on-air talent, you graduate and you're like, okay, where's my job? And that's just not how it works. And sometimes you feel like, I worked so hard for this, and I should have this, and I should have that, and that person got the position that I wanted, and why did they get it and not me? And you're not entitled to anything. And sometimes that entitlement will translate into your communication and the way you communicate with people. There have been so many times where I've been in a media room or in a press room and people can just be so snarky, or oh, I work at this network and I don't have to be nice or like whatever. But there's so many people who have started at, again, market 169, who have made it to the #1 market, to people who have started in the #1 market, who have then found themselves in market number 60. You don't know where you're gonna end up, so do not burn bridges. Again, even Nicole worked at SNY, and I'm like, oh. And she's talking about Mark Davis, and I'm like, I sit across, my desk is across from Mark Davis. We have banter every time I go into the office. He's amazing. But again, if I say I didn't know that and I treated Nicole in a terrible way, and she's like, oh yeah, Mark, I met this girl, Chelsea, and she was like so rude to me. Things will get back to whoever they need to get back to. And when you want a job, or when you lose a job, because that happens a lot in our industry, and you're trying to get back in the industry, those people will remember how you treated them or what you said to them. And again, it's like the Maya Angelou quote, like, I might not remember what you said or what you did, but I remember how you made me feel. And that is so paramount in this industry. So just be a kind person, and that's not saying be fake. If you are kind, you are kind. Like, that's just who you are as a person. But just remember that everyone will remember how you treat them.
I always say that the first people that I go and say hello to when I'm on the sideline are the security guards.
Oh, yeah.
The first people.
Yeah.
Because they will get you the access that nobody else can get you.
Right.
They will let you stand places where
Right.
nobody else will let you stand.
And they'll look out for you, and make sure you don't get hit by a football.
Exactly,
yeah, it's amazing.
Exactly. That's and I remember telling my boss that one time, and he was like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah, like that's the first." And I don't know if it's a female instinct or but that's the first person that I go to. I go and make friends. Hey, what's your name? Where are you? Oh,
Right.
cool.
Yeah.
And I think that it's those little things, I know every person at the barista's name, first and last name that work at NBC.
Right.
And maybe sometimes I'll get an extra shot of espresso in my coffee sometimes.
Right, yeah.
But it pays to be nice, because you don't know, that person might be in grad school, and in 5 years they're going to be the director that you're trying to get a job from.
Yep.
And we keep saying the industry is really small. So I just have a few kind of in the weeds questions about on-air stuff, fun ones. So I don't know, a lot of people know, but you get to do sideline for the UConn women's team. What is it, kind of a dual question here, working with coaches, interviewing at halftime is always interesting, because sometimes they're down and sometimes they're up. And, Gino Auriemma is a household name here in Connecticut and a very intense person. How do you juggle when a coach might be not having a great day or a great first half, and they know they have to talk to you? So they come up to you, and we both know the look on the face of a coach that is not having fun coaching. How do you tailor your questions to that? Does that change how you're going to ask the question or what questions you ask?
It definitely changes. I think there's a certain temperament that you have to ask your question or approach that conversation with. I think, one, building a relationship with that coach before you go into a game is very important, because you build trust. And so he knows that at halftime, you're not going to ask him an outlandish question. And so I'm really grateful that this being my first season, I was able to build a pretty good rapport with Gino, where our conversations were very conversational, and he knew the questions that I was going to ask him were never going to put him in a place or a negative place, I will say. But I think that you do have to approach those questions depending on where the game is going, with a certain, tone of empathy, because, and I think me being a former athlete and have played basketball, I think that really helps, because I'm like, oh, I have been in a situation where we were up 10 and then a team went on a 6-0 run, and now we're only up 4 at the half. So it's like, what do I think like my coach would tell me in this moment? So I do think that helps. But yeah, there's a certain empathy that you should have, whether they're up or down. And I think any coach, any athlete will tell you it's like the never too high, never too low thing, especially at the half. Like, it's a whole other half to play. Gino likes to keep me on my toes, which I like. We like to have a little bit of fun. But yeah, I think that first building a relationship with a coach, speaking to them pregame, even if you're just doing a one-off game. Like sometimes, there's freelancers, I'm just doing a couple games here or there, talking to them so they can get to know you. I think that that's important.
What kind of prep goes into that? Are you having weekly meetings, weekly Zoom calls, sending over questions, kind of help prep for, regardless if it's your sideline hits or just to prep for those little interviews that you're doing?
Yeah, so we have meetings. So let's say UConn is playing on a Wednesday. I will typically start doing my research, let's say, because my first game was like our only game in November. So I kind of started doing my research maybe like a week in advance, especially because I was new. But typically, if games are a day or two apart, right after, like the day after a game ends, you'll start your prep. I will send over my storylines to my producer. I'll send him an email. I usually send over maybe like 6 or 7 storylines, which again, this was my first season. He was like, oh, great. And so I'm like, is this like too much? Like whatever. I would send over my storylines. He would get back to me on some that he thinks are relevant for the game coming up that we'll use. We will have a meeting about 2 hours before tip. And then we'll go over just like our open, and then when the announcers come up, when they toss to me for my first hit. And yeah, that's typically how it goes. But there are some games where I go into a game and I'm like, okay, I have 2 storylines that I know I'm going to say. And so I'm like, great, let me get in the mirror and recite these a couple times, I'm good. But then there are games where you don't know what storylines you're gonna talk about. Sometimes you're just going off of, okay, maybe I got this nugget of information back in December, it is now February, and you just gotta pull it out. And that just comes from you just like really paying attention to the information that you're receiving and really knowing the team that you're covering. Because he'll be like, okay, your hit's coming up at the end of the first media timeout. And so I'm like, okay, cool. And sometimes literally when we go into that timeout, he's like, which storyline do you think we should do? And I'm like, I don't know, you tell me, like, let me know. And 15 seconds before we go on or I'm coming up, he's like, this is what we're doing. And it can be nerve-wracking in the moment, but I realize that, again, it's just you knowing your information, researching, and studying, so, yeah.
You've been able to grow from a smaller network to NESN to SNY. What are some of your goals for the future? Yeah, so I know that the next step that I want to take is to go to a national network. And I've been very, very blessed to be able to have the experience of working local and regional, and even more blessed that that happened quickly. But yeah, I think a national network, I was actually telling my dad the other day, I'm like, I don't know exactly what network I want that to be. I think that people grow up and they're like, obviously ESPN is like the pinnacle, the GOAT of sports coverage. NBC is amazing as well, because I work there. And CBS, Lauren, I'm sorry. I know, we got it all covered in this. We really do have it all covered.
You guys are so great. But I am still trying to, and a mentor actually asked me this the other day, and I was telling him I need to really specify exactly where I want to be, because again, I'm a very faith-based person, and when you're manifesting things, especially in this industry, you need to be specific. But I do want it to be a national network, and I think that is a gradual next step for me that I'm really excited about. So we'll see.
Awesome. So I just have a few more questions, and then we're going to open it up to questions from you guys. But just what is something that, people fantasize and dream about being on air? It's what a lot of kids, when they go into school for sports, want to do. They're like, I want to be a sports reporter, or I want to be a play-by-play announcer. What's something, it can be positive or negative, or maybe one of each, that people just don't know about being on air?
Yeah. I'll start with the positive, because I probably have some more negatives than positives. The positive is that it is the best job in the world. And people used to tell me that all the time when I was first entering the industry, like, it's the best job ever, it's the best job ever. And I'm like, I'm working local news, and my fingers are frozen, I'm trying to shoot high school football, it's not the best job ever. But truly, and my first experience realizing that was covering the NBA Finals in 2022, Celtics Warriors. And that was my like, oh, this is the best job ever. And so I would just say like, yes, like obviously you don't see everything, but it is truly the best job ever. The negative I will say is, and I wish that I had more information about this going into it, is that people don't realize, especially being on air, and we talked about working local news, is that it is not necessarily the financial dream that you might think it is. And I think because when we're watching mainstream media, it's mostly national media, right? ESPN, NBC, and we see the amazing outfits and these really incredible announcers have been doing it forever, and they're making a certain amount of money. And you're like, oh, I'm just gonna get my first job and I'm gonna be good. And that was what I thought was going to happen. And I was brought down to reality very quickly.
Very quickly.
Very quickly, especially in Utica. And I'm so grateful to have, again, the support system of my parents. Literally would not be able to survive without them because of my salary at the time. And so what I tell people on air, and this is what I was told from a mentor of mine, Elle Duncan, she said, you get in and you get out type thing. And I know not everyone has the luxury of doing that, but I think what she was saying was, especially if you want to get to the point where this is the best job ever, you do your time, get your experience, you grow, and growth is important so that you can make it to the next level and then really start to reap the benefits of it. But I think as an industry in general, we should be more transparent about salaries and things.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I hope that as people go into their interviews and things like that, it's becoming better. Mm-hmm. But I've had a few places that at the second I turn on the Zoom call, they tell you what the salary is. Yeah. And I think more places should be like that because mm-hmm. there are opportunities that people sometimes have to turn down because of finances. Yep. And I think a big something that I would share if I were, I don't know, a few years younger maybe, and my undergrad is in musical theater. So I did many a contract getting paid less than minimum wage, mm-hmm. Eating Pop-Tarts and like cereal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Yeah. Yep. And I wish that as a society, I guess, we could know our worth a little bit more and mm-hmm. understand that when you graduate, asking for things isn't a bad thing, and knowing what you're getting yourself into before you accept a job is really, really important. Right. Because we've said, the industry is small, and most of these places, especially if you're on air, you're going to sign a contract for a specific amount of time that you can't break. Right. So you want to know what you're getting yourself into before you sign your name on that paper. Right. And I think some people are just so excited to get the job offer or that they'll take anything, but make sure that you do your research beforehand. 1,000%.
And that's why even for me too, and I haven't necessarily been in this position yet because when I left Nesson, they actually didn't backfill that position. But the person that I technically took over their position at SNY currently, when they were leaving, they told me what they were making. And so I feel like if we have more transparency, and I'm not saying you have to do that all the time, but I like to use this analogy a lot. I think it was last season, NFL season, Jalen Hurts at the time had signed like the biggest, Jalen Hurts is the quarterback for the Eagles. I know you all know that, I'm sorry. He had signed the biggest contract for an NFL quarterback at the time. Lamar Jackson does not have an agent. And so Lamar Jackson was then like, I think he was trying to renegotiate his contract. And so when he saw that Jalen signed for this, he was like, oh, so I need this. Yeah. And so obviously in our industry and every other industry, their salaries are not broadcasted on the TV. Yep. But I think that there should be a little transparency, especially when you're a little lower down the totem pole, just to say, okay, this is what I was making, this is where we're at. Again, I made this 4 years ago, times have changed, inflation, you should ask for this, make sure you have that, make sure you're able to take care of yourself. So.
I think that's really important, and I think it's a new age, and I think a lot of younger people are starting to talk about salaries, and especially females in the industry, making sure that you are not, I don't want to say getting screwed, but
but that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you're getting paid what you're worth.
Right.
So the last question I'll ask before we open it up is, what would you tell yourself, you know, maybe 16-year-old you at Stratford High or 21-year-old you about to graduate from college? What advice would you give yourself about how your next few years were going to turn out?
Oh man, it's so funny. I was thinking about this when I first got my job at SNY, and I was like, you know, when people ask you what your 5-year plan is, I would have never thought ever that I would be in the position that I am in now. 5 years ago, you know, in undergrad when I graduated, never would have thought. So I would tell myself to, one, like, really go after what you want, keep the dream alive type thing, but learn as much as you can. You're never gonna stop learning. And that growth is really, really important. I've seen so much growth from myself personally since starting local news to now, which is the best part. One of the best parts, again, about this job is you see tangible growth. And it's just like, whoa, like I look at some of my old, I'm like, what was I thinking? And I thought I was gonna be like on ESPN. Are you kidding me? So never stop learning. And one thing that I will say too is you're taught in this industry to take whatever job is available just to get in. And the first job offer that I got was in Mississippi. I laugh about it because my dad's from Mississippi, and I was like, ain't no way I am going to move to Mississippi. But it was a news job, and I remember going back to my mentor, and I was like, okay, this is my first job offer, like, it's only in news. And she said, maybe I'll get some sports reps, but like, I just have to do it and get in and get the experience. And it's a 2-year contract and whatever. And he was like, wait a second, sleep on it. You don't have to say yes to your first offer. And I prayed about it. I talked to my mom about it, and I said no. And I was so scared to say no because I was like, when will the next offer come? And in this industry, sometimes you don't know. Yeah. And thankfully, a month later, the Utica job came. But if I didn't say no, I would have been in Mississippi during COVID by myself. But that's what I would tell my younger self, just to continue to learn, keep the dream alive, and it's okay to say no sometimes.
Everything happens for a reason.
Everything. God is good.
All right, so we're going to open up to some questions. Anybody have any questions? Molly?
Hi, Molly.
I think. How did I know you would ask a question?
Lucky guess. So I know that you've gone through the ranks of local and now regional, SNY, New York being the biggest market. Along your career, of the journey, if there's more eyes on you, there's more expectations. How do you handle that, knowing that the opinion's just getting more stronger in your career?
Oh, that's such a great question. I love your sweater, by the way.
Altered State.
Oh, it's such a good sweater. Man, that's a great question. I think one saying is, what is it? Pressure is a privilege. And in Boston and New York, there's definitely pressure there. But I think what it comes down to is just like knowing the expectations that your boss has of you. They hired you for a reason, but also the expectations that you have of yourself as well. You don't want to go out there and just be like, whatever, like, because Boston sports fans and definitely New York sports fans will keep you accountable. And I think they definitely will. And I think that, for me, is also a driving force because they're not afraid to call you out. But I think it's also part of just like the athlete in me, like you just go do it. It's almost like I say, like, when I'm going on air, especially during like the UConn games, being live games, I do get the butterflies that I would get before like playing a basketball game. And the butterflies are good because that means you care and you want to do well. But I think just keeping your mind focused on, yes, I'm here to do this job. I was hired to do it for a reason. And I know my stuff. And so I think that is very calming and relaxing, especially in very like sports-based cities. So I hope that answered your question.
Anyone else? Oh, me go for you.
So I'm a graduate student, and I just finished my last season of collegiate soccer, and I wanted to ask a little bit about your transition from being an athlete to the production and reporting side? And also, do you think going from a woman playing in sports to a woman working in sports is something that is attractive to hiring managers and producers? Do you think that gives you somewhat of an advantage in the industry?
Yeah, just to answer your second question first, I do think that it is appealing. I think it's appealing because there's an experience that you have as an athlete that is so different from a person who is not an athlete, that working in the sports industry will be so beneficial. And in my conversations with Gino and sideline reporting, there are so many transferable skills that I got from just playing that have helped me with the phrasing of my questions, with storylines that I'm coming up with talking to coaches or commissioners or whatever. Because there's certain things that you just understand or certain experiences that you have that give you a little bit of a leg up. I do think that it's also appealing to hiring managers because, again, there is a certain like fervor, determination, perseverance, all of those traits that you have as an athlete. You're gonna use that in your work. So it's like, okay, I have a deadline to meet, I'm gonna meet that deadline. And it's not even something that you have to say, it's just in you. Like, you're just going to do it. Like, whatever you put your mind to, you're going to do it. So that's why I think it's appealing. For me, transferring from playing to working in sports is a dream, because playing Division III basketball, like, there's no way you're playing after college. And so I wanted to stay close to sports in some capacity. And so I think, again, having Kristen DeCarly, the SID at the time there, seeing her work in sports, I'm like, oh, this is something that I can actually do. Like, seeing another woman doing it in her capacity motivated me to be able to do it in another capacity, even though our jobs are completely different. But yeah, so yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, my name is John O'Brien. You talked a lot about like your upbringing and everything. I just want to know, what's like one key influential factor, whether it be through your work experience, faith life, relationships, with either mentorship or your family, that has given you a sense of purpose within your career, and how has it pushed you forward to do your best?
Wow, that is such a good question that I wish I had so much more time to think about. Oh man, that's given me purpose. Well, God gives me purpose. And I think I saw something the other day online, like 2 of the best days of your life is like being born and like finding out why. And I think that when I started doing on-air stuff, especially I think when I got to Nesson and kind of got validation that, okay, like you are pretty good at this, I realized in moments that certain things that that some of my coworkers had to deal with or that they were doing came naturally to me. And even hearing like feedback like from my parents, and like my parents will watch every show, and I love it so much, and they'll just be like, you know what, you look so natural. And then I was kind of getting that from bosses and things like that, and I'm like, okay, well, if it's feeling like this for me, and then also for people are seeing that as well, I feel like that is like my purpose. And so I think it's just, yeah, just God just giving me, and I think that's with all of us, like we're given certain talents and gifts. And I think I'm blessed enough to have been able to figure it out in a way, and now I'm really able to show it, if that makes sense. So my purpose comes from God, and then like my family, of course. You're welcome.
Anybody else? We got 2 more.
Hi, from also having working at SNY, I'm just a little curious because when I had worked there, I was a first-time producer ever, which was absolutely incredible. I'm just a little curious, from working with talent and also having a great relationship with a lot of the people over there, what do you look for the most with a producer or a BA in general? What's something that's important to you?
That's a great question. One of my favorite producers at SNY, the thing that I love about him is that he is just so detailed. And some people will say, obviously, as a producer, you should be detailed. But the way that he prepares for our shows is so different from the other producers and how they prepare. we have meetings. He, outlines, and they usually will outline like the rundown or things that we're going to talk about. But he is so detailed, even into like the nuggets or the way that I want you to phrase this, or the inflection here, or energy here. And I think for me, like that feedback and that preparation calms me as a talent, because sometimes you can go into a show with a producer who is quote unquote all over the place, isn't necessarily as detailed. And as a talent, sometimes that will frazzle you, because it's like, I don't want to have to think about, and it's so funny that I'm saying this now, because working local news, you are producing all your stuff and you're thinking about 10,000 things. But as a talent now, it's like, I don't want to have to think about, is this ready? Is that ready? Is this going to come in when it needs to? You're like screaming in my ear. Like, it's just, this guy, he has such a calming presence, and it's because of the way that he prepares. So I think with producers, what I would love from producers is just be prepared as much as you need to be. If we need to meet twice, 2-3 times before this show, let's do that. And I also like to collaborate with producers as well. Like, some producers will like to write full shows for talent or pretty much do everything. I like to write my stuff as much as I can, if possible, given the time. But I do like to collaborate. So I think the collaboration piece and the preparation is really big as far as producers are concerned.
Can we get a mic to her? That one's gotcha.
Hi.
Hi.
You were talking about in the beginning how for advice on like entry-level jobs and how to not have an entitled mindset. So my question is like, what at least a healthy mindset to have, so you're not putting yourself down too much where you're like losing your confidence, but like how would you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say to keep your main thing the main thing. So if you have a goal in mind, keep that goal in the forefront. But I just don't want college students or grad students just to feel like they deserve something just because of something else, because they did something. I wouldn't be afraid to start behind the scenes and get that experience. There are so many things today that, because I worked behind the scenes, it helps me so much as a talent, and you can attest to this probably too, Morgan.
Yeah.
Just like knowing like what's going on, what's happening in your ear, the control room, like even the terminology. There's certain things that you understand that some of my colleagues who have never done it don't understand. So I think just being open-minded and not just settling on, I just need to be on air, that's all I want to do. Sometimes just getting your foot in the door, and that doesn't mean like, okay, if I can't be on air local, like I just need to go straight to ESPN and just get like a behind the scenes job. That means you can go to a local or a regional and start behind the scenes, get your experience, work your way up type of thing. So I think just being more open-minded and not being so narrow-minded on just one specific job.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, there's obviously a lot of different paths that people can take. Being a production assistant or working on big shows at big networks can be super helpful. There's a reason why the people that work on those shows are. I get to work with Maria Taylor, Chris Sims, Mike Florio on a daily basis during the season. And obviously, I am not Maria Taylor. Do I aspire to be like her one day? Yes, of course. But it's unrealistic coming out as a college student to think that I'm gonna get a job hosting the biggest studio show in the country, but getting an opportunity to work and learn and listen and see how she works and the way that people treat her and the way that these big networks that one day you hope to work at work while getting experience in the industry is really helpful. Because when you're a PA, you kind of get to do a little bit of everything, get to work with a lot of people, and I think you get to see how different kinds of producers and directors work. And like you said, you can see like some people would love a job where everything is done for them. Everything is written, they just walk in, they sit down, they do the show. Other people would like to be more collaborative, and I think you only learn that by working with different kinds of people.
Right, yeah, that's a great answer. I would say that for me, being able to, because again, I was an operations technician behind the scenes, basically setting up live shots for all of our reporters in the field at the local station. Simultaneously, when I was a PA at NBC Sports, you're seeing these big productions. So I was able to see how things work in a smaller or like a local level to these huge, massive productions. So I was able to get two different perspectives that like now, which is so funny because RSNs meet right in the middle, being a talent now really, really helped me. So I would say be open-minded.
Anybody else?
Oh.
How's it going? My name is Brandon, AKA Chelsea's brother. And I had a quick question for you. I know being a former athlete, there are some pregame rituals that go into just preparing for a big game or a big interview. And I wanted to know if you still kept any of the ones that you had as a former athlete, or if there are any new ones that you adopted in your new role.
Oh, that's such a great, fun question.
That is really fun. I like that.
I will say one that I kept is that during the national anthem, I always pray. And I used to do that all the time. You see a lot of athletes do that.
Yeah.
But I realized like during like my first game, it's just like you have that moment. And so I do that. I used to do that before all of my games. I do that now before all of my games. And I think it's really cool to be able to do it in different capacities. I haven't picked up any new ones yet, but now I feel like I need to. So thank you for that question. I think I'm going to pick up some new ones.
I do.
Yeah,
So
let's hear yours.
I get notebooks, and I always get notebooks with sayings on the front of them. So this one says, work hard, stay humble, be kind, take the leap.
Ooh.
So every time I like pull it out to do something for it, I'm like, read it. It's a lot of like things to
I love that.
do,
Yeah.
but I have a special pen and my notebook that I use for every game. And when it's finished, and you get to go to Staples and find a new one with a new fun quote on it.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like to hype yourself up in
Yeah,
a way.
little bit.
I
It's
love
like,
that.
that reminder.
Yeah.
Or some people do sticky notes.
Yes, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming and meeting with us and letting us pick your brains and
course.
open up about your career, your life. This industry can be, like we've said, tough. And we need more people like you who are willing to come and speak to people about the in-depths of the industry.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but seriously, slide in my DMs or find me out here. Like, send me an email. Well, really slide in my DMs because I get those notifications immediately. And I'm here to help. If you ever want to talk, need feedback, advice, just want to let it out and scream. I have a lot of mentors. I just need to just like let this out.
Yeah.
Please do that and use me as a resource as much as you need to. So thank you, Morgan.
You're welcome. This has been really fun.
Yeah, thank you.
It's
I
like
appreciate
we've known
it.
each other forever.
I
you
know. I mean, we do now.
I know. We'll be friends forever.
Yes.
All right, guys, thank you so much.